is my enormous pleasure to introduce, to speak to you here today, the voted by her co-workers in Parliament, hardest working parliamentarian, and the greatest orator in Parliament, and pretty much the only person left on our federal political stage that inspires me and gives me a sense of hope for the sense of our future. I'm so delighted to see you. Please.
Oh, is this okay? Is it too echoey? Is this, the volume's good? Feel okay, great. And I'm thrilled to be in Vasco da Gama Hall. This is obviously a place of great community vibe. I can feel it from all of its history. And Peter was just taking me up and down the street to visit wonderful local establishments with great local food and green principles. And Hamilton is clearly having a renaissance of green, a resurgence of green, and it's fantastic. So the liveliness of your cultural and art scene is obviously why the Junos are here this weekend, and I think that's extremely cool, and it's a tribute to what's happening at the grassroots, because it's happening from people knitting together culture through social networks and cohesion and a willingness to reach out to each other, support each other in local businesses and local stores and local creative artists. So it's really encouraging, and I'm so impressed in the time of the little tour that I've been taking, starting with Mustard Seed, local food and local co-op. If anyone here hasn't, become a member of Mustard Seed yet, run right down and do it. They're up to 18. I think it's 1830 members at the moment. So probably that's everybody here plus some more people. But anyway. I have absolutely no idea what I want to talk about with you tonight. Absolutely none. All I've got on my mind is fighting Bill C-51. And that's, okay. So, good then. That's what we'll talk about. The horror of it is that Stephen Harper is trying to make Canadians very, very afraid. So afraid and and constantly referencing the notion that we're at war, constantly referencing, and when C-51 was announced, it was January 30th. It was not announced it was announced initially at a campaign-style rally in Richmond Hill, Ontario, where Stephen Harper said that jihadist extremism is not a human right. It's an act of war. I mean, all in one sentence, that's what he said. It's like, how many hot points of fear did you manage to hit? War, extremism, jihadism, terrorism, and it's not a human right. Did anyone ever say it was a human right? Talk about absurd statements. But nevertheless, the idea that he seems to have embraced is that if your Canadians are scared out of their wits, we can be scared out of our rights. And that won't work. So, fortunately, we can all remind ourselves that we're not a country at war. We're a country in peacetime. We are blessed to live in one of the safest countries on earth. You've seen the statistics. Some things are floating around on Facebook. More Canadians are at risk of being killed by a moose than by a jihadi extremist. Now, it's true, the moose has no intent. That's true. It's hard to find moose and avoid their radicalization. But no, this is a remote threat. That doesn't mean we don't take it seriously. But Bill C-51 is not primarily an act to deal with terrorism. Bill C-51 is primarily an act to create a secret police, to take CSIS, which had been since 1984 when it was created, and some of us in this room are old enough to remember that it was created in order to deal with the situation that emerged when the RCMP decided that they could be a spy force and a police force and do really clever things to catch the FLQ, like burn down somebody's barn and then get caught. So in the wake of that, and I believe it or not, I find myself inexplicably about to quote Conrad Black. I can't stop myself. In the National Post 2 weeks ago on Saturday, he wrote that if anyone doesn't think that Canadian police and security forces are capable of doing things which were, quote unquote, unfathomably stupid, we can remember the burning down the barn incident, which led to the commission, which led to the creation of CSIS in 1984 as a standalone domestic spy agency. Domestic, within Canada, intelligence gathering only, not a police force. And the RCMP could then be the police force that gets the intelligence from CSIS, so on. So that's 1984. As we all know, laws around national security in Canada changed dramatically after 9/11. And Chrétien was Prime Minister, refreshing our memories. I don't know how many of you remember that debate about bringing anti-terrorism legislation into Canada. As at the time, I was Executive Director of Sierra Club of Canada. I asked to testify before that House of Commons committee. One of my friends on the committee is the NDP MP, Bill Blakey. And I said, Bill, can I get on that witness list? This thing looks really dangerous. This thing looks like it's going to ensnare environmental protesters. And he said, we're taking our time. Don't worry. You don't have to testify because your views have been shared by so many other people. The hearings went on for months, actually. And the government of the day relented. They were about to use really bad language, in which they would say, the bad language as in badly drafted language. They were about to say that this bill, which was going to really restrict and impede civil liberties in Canada by allowing things like preventative detention, arresting someone before they did anything, things like security certificates to hold somebody in jail who doesn't even know the charges against them. Things that violate basic concepts that have been part of the DNA of Commonwealth countries since forever, that you have the right to know the charges against you, you have a right to a lawyer, you have a right to know how to prepare your defense, and you can't be held in jail indefinitely without knowing the charges against you. The security certificates turned that on its head. But they said, don't worry, they said back in 2001, we'll take this carefully, we'll put a sunset clause on it, we're going to watch them very carefully. So we've had rules that we've had this relinquishment of some of our civil liberties in aid of tracking so-called terrorists. But back in 2001, when I said to Bill Blakey, this is a worry, my worry was around this language that said, we will not have this law apply to lawful protest. And at the time I said, well, what about protest but where you find yourself in nonviolent civil disobedience? What about Rosa Parks sitting down in the whites only section of the bus? That's an unlawful protest, but that's heroism, that's not terrorism. So you start looking at this and taking it apart. Back in 2001, the Justice Department lawyers actually advised the Justice Minister, lawful protest as the terminology is going to mean that nonviolent civil disobedience could be caught up in this act. So back in 2001, they took out the word lawful. And they said it doesn't apply to protest, right? So here we are in 2015, and I've asked this question in the House of Commons in question period directly of Stephen Harper, of Peter MacKay, the Justice Minister, of Stephen Blaney, the Minister for Public Safety, and they all say, well, it's too bad the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands has not read the Act. It says right here, it does not apply to lawful protest. See? So each time I ask the question, I try to make it clearer. Talking about the fact that I'd like to break the law, right? Me, here, I'm ready to go stand in front of pipeline. I'll do nonviolent civil disobedience if called upon. I regard it as not, doesn't recommend me in my CV that I don't have a single arrest. I feel this is something that is lacking. Given the crisis that we're on this planet, I look at friends of mine who, for instance, our candidate, the Green Party candidate in Burnaby, North Seymour. Her name is Lynn Cornby, Dr. Lynn Cornby. She's a PhD biochemist. She's the chair of the Department of Molecular Biology at Simon Fraser University. She'd never done a single radical thing in her life until Kinder Morgan decided to put a pipeline through Burnaby Mountain. Then Lynn Cornby started writing letters to the editor and saying out loud things like, I'll do anything to fight Kinder Morgan. I'm prepared to get arrested. So the next thing she knew, Kinder Morgan dropped this big pile of documents on her desk, and it was a slap suit against her personally and 4 other people for $5 million for criticizing Kinder Morgan. At that point, Lynn Cornby thought, well, they're going to take my house, what the hell? So then she got arrested, blockading the pipelines. I don't know, here in Hamilton, I mean, these are stories we know in BC. Did you know what happened to all the Kinder Morgan arrestees protesting that pipeline? There were a whole lot of people arrested on Kinder Morgan, on Burnaby Mountain, by the RCMP, enforcing an injunction obtained by Kinder Morgan, the company that claims it knows what it's doing, knows where to lay a pipeline, knows how to handle bitumen mixed with diluent. One of the arrestees was David Suzuki's grandson. There was a lot of publicity, particularly in BC, about these arrests that were just in late November. The evasion is hoping that the Canadian public won't figure out that every time I ask whether they intend to take up in their bizarre, loosely knit definition of threats to Canadian security, which are then used for information sharing throughout the Government of Canada, and they refuse to admit that they know that they've come up with a new definition of threats to the security of Canada that's so broad and so bizarre that it applies to almost anything. And then they say, well, don't worry, we're collecting information. Government agencies are sharing information, one agency to the other, and people shouldn't be paranoid about that, except for Clause 6, which says that any one of the 17 agencies within the Government of Canada that can start essentially spying on us. So you have an IRS agent who says, or rather CRA agent who says, look, I'm looking at your income tax stuff. Something's funny here, I think I'll call CSIS. Or I don't know why they have to amend the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Act, which they're doing. It is trying to obtain a fisheries license something that terrorists do a lot? Is that a thing? Because I don't know that that's a thing, that people try to get fisheries licenses to, on the west coast of Canada, maybe masquerading as a halibut fisher. Somebody who has terrorist intent can move closer to, I don't have any idea why they want to change the laws enough to ensure that they have whole of government information sharing about Canadians, regardless of whether we look like we might be involved in violent extremism or not, whole of government access to the information. And then Clause 6 says, this information, once shared, can be disclosed by any one of these 17 agencies to any person, for any purpose. Hello, it's an interesting phraseology. So moving to the second section is the first part, so it's an omnibus bill, right? I'm probably going to take too long and lose you on all this, but it's an omnibus bill. So there's 5 different laws in C-51. The first is the information sharing one I was just describing. The second is a no-fly list. Yesterday in the House of Commons, so interesting that the head of the representative of the airline industry came and said, we want to do our part to stop terrorists from getting on airplanes. We're ready to do our part, whatever. But this part of the bill worries us, that the minister can tell the airline companies and the frontline people who are the at the kiosks providing the boarding passes, they're the ones who have to tell someone they're on the no-fly list, and they're not supposed to let people on the airplane. It says in the act that that the minister can instruct them to do anything. And they said that word anything kind of worries us, because what could we be asked to do? Why does it say anything? Well, anyway, no-fly list is while they try to get our attention over here on we don't want schoolgirls getting on airplanes to go to Syria in the delusional idea that they can find happiness with an ISIS fighter. I think that is a delusional idea. I'd like to stop any schoolgirl from doing that myself. But the no-fly list is really about once a Canadian who might be unfortunate enough to be a dual citizen, who finds themselves on the wrong side of the border and wants to come home to Canada, they'll find themselves on a no-fly list. That's where the risk really is. So we've got the no-fly list. Part 3 is changes to the criminal code to deal with what they so what they want us to look at, look over here, the issue everyone's going to agree on. We really don't want people lured into dangerous situations or losing their lives because they've seen propaganda videos on YouTube or on websites. We want to get at that. But then you read the act and you think, if that's what they want to get at, why is this called terrorism propaganda? Is dissemination of information about terrorism in general. I feel the lawyers are looking at this and thinking, what on earth does it mean, terrorism in general? Bear in mind, we have laws about terrorism. They're already on the criminal code. They've never called it terrorism in general. We have a definition of terrorism. There's no definition of terrorism in general. And unlike the laws that we have for taking things off websites, now everybody will know taking things off websites engages civil liberties questions, censorship questions, who makes the decision, what goes on and off websites. I mean, all Canadians are pretty much, I think, I shouldn't say all, but I would assume that most Canadians clearly don't want to have horrible videos that encourage people to get involved in violent activities. I am non-violent, I'm against violence, and I'm a pacifist, so I'm all for stopping videos that encourage people to get involved with violence. We already have laws that deal with hate speech found online, deal with online child pornography. We have all kinds of existing laws that have created a kind of a form of how it's done. This particular Part 3 of Bill C-51 goes way outside of all those. The hate speech and the child pornography ones have statutory defenses. They also exclude private conversation, not this. You can find yourself hauled up on charges for a private conversation. Actually, I don't know how many of you have seen the Conservative Party's efforts to fundraise by using the ISIS, well, it's claimed to be, it's not ISIS, it's another rogue terrorist organization that used a picture of the West Edmonton Mall, which no Canadian, I don't think, would have seen, except that the Conservative Party decided to fundraise with it and put it out everywhere. Now, under the terms of Part 3 of Bill C-51, they are guilty of promoting terrorism. The Conservative Party will be the first ones up. I don't want this bill to pass, but if it passes, I'm going to see if I can get a conviction. Anyway, so there's a chilling of free speech. The definition of propaganda, by the way, is not just a video or writing. I don't have the act in front of me, but it's any symbol or gesture or content of any kind. So I think the graphic of a clenched fist, which I've seen around as a graphic of a clenched fist since the 1960s, graphics that suggest a movement could also be considered terrorist propaganda for terrorism in general. Moving along, Part 4 is maybe the scariest part. This is where they change CSIS. Now, by the way, there's also Bill C-44, which is still before the Senate, which takes the first part of CSIS's mission and changes it. Under C-44, which is an anti-terrorism piece of legislation they brought in at the end of 2014, CSIS can operate internationally. So that's a big step. Under C-51, CSIS, now operating both domestically and internationally, is no longer restricted to collecting information, collecting intelligence, doing intelligence work. It now has a mandate to go out there and obstruct and reduce the threats by any means. So CSIS becomes a secret police force in Canada and around the world, empowered to do, well, the only restrictions on what CSIS is allowed to do, CSIS agents under this bill are specifically not allowed to cause bodily harm or death. I think that's good news. They're also not allowed to knowingly pervert the course of justice, but accidentally, what? The third thing they're not allowed to do, quote unquote, is violate the sexual integrity of any person. Well, that's a relief, because otherwise they probably would have thought they could do that. So CSIS agents are given this strange mandate to go out there and reduce the threat, and the only time they have to go to a judge is if the CSIS agents have decided for themselves that they're about to violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or they're about to break a domestic law. Then they have to go to a judge. Now, there's nothing like this in any history of jurisprudence, not only in Canada, in any country I can think of, that says if you think you're about to violate the Constitution, go to a judge and get permission. The experts who testified yesterday before the House, Professor Craig Forsese at University of Ottawa, said This is the constitutional breach warrant. We have never had anything like this in the history of Canada or any other country. And they said, talking to our Five Eyes partner, which is the security term for the ones we share information with, which is the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, none of them have anything like this either. They also have far greater oversight than we do. They have reports on what happens with a warrant. They report on what their spies are doing. This particular formulation is why this bill will not, this is the most important thing to share when you're talking to people who say, well, we've got to do something about terrorism. Right. This bill will not make us safer. This bill will make the existing investigation of terrorist plots far harder and will thwart, likely, very likely, thwart prosecutions because CSIS agents are given the power to go out and grant immunity to people they want to come work with them. So imagine the RCMP is trying to get a witness. CSIS offers them immunity. CSIS has no obligation to tell the RCMP what it's doing. I just can see the day. I mean, given that our history, again, Conrad Black is channeling through me, has examples of police acting in ways that are unfathomably stupid, we could have CSIS agents infiltrating a group while the RCMP is that group. They could be spying on each other. There's no way under this legislation that they will know what each other is doing. And it actually is going to make us less safe. The Air India inquiry was really clear on this point. RCMP had tapes about some of the people who actually put the bomb on that plane back in 1984, the Air India plane, which is the single biggest terrorist event in Canadian history. 390 people died, most of them Canadian. The fake baggage handlers who put the bomb on the plane that left Montreal, the plot was hatched in Vancouver. Various elements of our security forces all knew that they were planning something, but they didn't share the information with each other. So the number one recommendation of the Air India inquiry was don't let this happen again. Make sure that intelligence services and the police report to each other what they're doing. No hoarding information, no thinking we're smarter than the RCMP and the RCMP thinking those CSIS guys don't know what they're doing. This is a formula for disaster. So it's not just that it impedes our civil liberties, it's not just that it tramples on our rights, it's not just that it's going to empower them to go out and track as if they already aren't. We know they're already infiltrating and tracking Idle No More and environmental groups and First Nations organizations. We know that. Which is why, by the way, if any of you are activists and are involved with groups, if you ever have anyone in your group who suggests doing something violent, take a picture of them and never allow them in the room again. Tell them you know they're with the RCMP or CSIS and you don't want them in the room anymore. Because otherwise, you're going to get... Yeah. So, nonviolence is the only way to handle this kind of pervasive threat of intrusion and infiltration. Nonviolence is the only way in any case. I mean, that's pretty clear. The best protest movements ever organized, from Gandhi to Martin Luther King, said we stand on nonviolence. That's how we get things done. That's how we prick the conscience of the people who aren't paying attention. And certainly the Green Party is founded in 6 core principles, and one of them is creating a culture of nonviolence and peace. So, this whole thing, it's important for people to know, because I don't think there's a chance that as we organize pipeline protests, whether it's Energy East or Enbridge or Kinder Morgan, that we are not already having surveillance. We already have the report of the RCMP that was released, which Perry Bellegarde, the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, tabled with the Public Safety Committee yesterday, that said there are, you've probably heard of this report, that said there are anti-petroleum ideologues out there. That's RCMP language. Anti-petroleum ideologues who claim, what a claim, that burning fossil fuels causes climate change. The RCMP find this group to be a threat to the security of Canada because our economy depends on petroleum. So therefore, these people who claim this, I asked in the House of Commons if the Minister for Public Safety, Stephen Blaney, based on this report, wouldn't agree that it was important to have science training for RCMP officers so they would understand the threat of climate change and not fall into ignorance as they had in this report. Unfortunately, Stephen Blaney didn't answer the question, and neither did the Minister of Environment, who popped up to read the usual talking point about the sector-by-sector approach of the Canadian government in reducing greenhouse gases. Anyway, I've got to get to part 5 of C51 before I wrap up C51 and move into something else. Part 5 of C51 is the part that's been talked about the least. Part 5 of C51 is amendments to the Immigration and Refugee Act. This one hurts your head to read because it looks that the difference from the last version of the same bill is so strangely minor that it looks like the change might be benign. And fortunately for me, I was able to ask Professor Donald Galloway, who is an expert in immigration and refugee law, was the Green Party candidate in Victoria in 2012, who nearly lost the seat by 3% of the vote. It was so close. Anyway, he's a brilliant man. And Craig Forsese and Kent Roach had also not been able to figure out Part 5 because immigration and refugee law is a little different. Okay, it's a hot room. I shouldn't keep you all standing here in suspense. Part 5 is all about how a minister will present to a judge the evidence to allow one of these security certificates to be executed. One of these, you're going to jail without exactly knowing what the charges are against you, right? And the new change will allow a minister, this is what we believe, they haven't confirmed this obviously, will allow a minister to ask a judge to provide the permission for a security certificate without revealing to the judge or anyone else that the information on which the request is based was obtained by torture. So, and Vic Taves said this in the House before he left his seat in Parliament to go to become a judge in Manitoba. He actually said that he thought we should be able to use evidence obtained by torture in exceptional circumstances. Everyone who knows anything about this kind of evidence knows that it is spectacularly unreliable. Evidence obtained by torture is worthless, and torture is illegal. And a civilized country like Canada does not use evidence obtained by torture. Some of the debates I've witnessed since I became a member of Parliament, I thought I'd never see. We had a debate on this subject back when Vic Taves first raised it, and Rob Nicholson, who's currently our Minister of Foreign Affairs, said, if there was a plane full of people from your community, and we could save that plane full of people with evidence obtained by torture, are you telling us we shouldn't use that? The hypothetical is absurd. Evidence obtained by torture is worthless, and it's immoral. So I think we have to stand rather firm on this point, but that's part 5 of a 5-part bill, and with it being pushed through the House as fast as it is, it will never get adequate study, which is why we have to mobilize as many Canadians as possible to stop it. Tomorrow is the National Day of Action on C51. I know there's a demonstration in Hamilton. You probably all know exactly where it's taking place. There are, at last count, 45 communities with demonstrations against C51. I won't tell you which reporter it was that I was talking to today in Ottawa, telling them I was going to be in Toronto for the demo tomorrow. And they said, well, there won't be big turnouts after all, because Canadians aren't interested in this. I said, what are you talking about? I said, last week when I was back in my riding, the Young Greens at University of Victoria asked me on a Saturday night if I'd be willing to do a teach-in on C51. And I said, sure, but my only free night is Wednesday. They booked the hall Monday morning. They booked the biggest auditorium on the UVic campus. Between Monday morning and Wednesday night when the event was held, they publicized it on Facebook, and extraordinary measures in publicity, they used chalk throughout the campus to write the information down about where this event would be. 350 people showed up. And so the reporter from Ottawa said, oh yeah, but that's British Columbia. I really want them to be surprised on Saturday by the numbers of people. So if you have friends on Facebook that you haven't flipped to them the Lead Now website, if you have people you can bring to the rally here in Hamilton, if you can encourage friends in Toronto, Montreal, wherever your friends and family are, tell them it's really going to matter. Because the size of the crowd can help stop this bill. The size of the crowd will get, I think, I'm not writing off the Liberals on this. The Liberals have taken it's almost unforgivable, but I have to leave them room to come back over and join us. I mean, I was the first MP to stand up and say this is a secret police act. I said it on February 2nd. It took a while, but I'm really, really pleased that Tom Mulcair agreed with me by February 19th. So I'm leaving space here. It will be more effective to stop this bill if we can get the Liberals to vote with us. So the more pressure there is on Liberals, the better. The bigger the rallies there are, the better. The more letters to the editor there are on this bill, the better. When you have a convergence, like the editorial board of the National Post and the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star and Rex Murphy and Conrad Black, and I know I know they're laughing. I find it amazing that I've found myself in agreement in a short period of time with people I haven't had a thing to agree with these guys about in so long I can't, well, never is the answer, never. It's been never since I agreed with Conrad Black on anything. And I'm thrilled with the position he took. His article in the National Post, if you missed it, said if Canadians don't wake up, we will find ourselves in an unrecognizable despotism like Turkey, Argentina, or Louisiana. Yeah, it was a funny line. I thought it was good. So, that's one for Lord Black. Here we are fighting C-51 and it matters. It also matters that we have more Green MPs in Parliament after the next election. So I want to share some good news with you. 2015 is the year that Stephen Harper's era ends. Over. Looking at this room, I'm imagining this is the kind of crowd that has friends saying to you all the time, oh, but what about, oh, what if he gets in again? Oh, no. I mean, okay, number one, John Baird didn't quit because he thought they were going to get in again. Right? John Baird has no other job to go to, by the way. This is not the story they put out there. All right, so John Baird quit. Is he the only Conservative not running again? No, there's more than 24 other Conservatives not running again. There's a reason these guys, some of them quite young, are leaving Parliament and not running again. The base, this is what you never really hear about. The Conservatives who voted for Stephen Harper in 2011 and in 2008 and in 2006 went from believing they were electing someone, and they did believe in him. They had actual faith in the idea that this was someone who would not allow the kind of scummy insider abuse of ethics that was the Liberal sponsorship scandal. They really thought this was someone who's going to go in and clean up Dodge, not going to ever be caught using public funds in ways that were inappropriate. They are completely disillusioned. He appointed more senators to the Senate on one single day than any prime minister in the history of Canada, and on that one day, that list included Mike Duffy, Pamela Wallin, and Patrick Brazeau. He can't claim these aren't his children. He appointed them and told them go forth and fundraise for the Conservative Party. That's why they were picked. You can't claim when you're a control freak and knows absolutely everything that's going on within Ottawa. No one, not just within the Conservative Party, mind you. Stephen Harper has taken the Prime Minister's office, which is an illegitimate agency. It's not in our Constitution, and it actually runs contrary to our fundamental principles of Westminster parliamentary democracy to have a Prime Minister act as dictator. We don't teach this in schools anymore, but right up until 1970, every Prime Minister of Canada thought of it as a part-time job. They were Prime Minister and Minister of something else. Prime Minister and Minister of Justice was the usual one. Prime Minister and Secretary for Foreign Affairs was another one. The idea that being Prime Minister was akin to being President is a corrupting notion which has contaminated our understanding of our own system of government. We're a Westminster parliamentary system, which means, in principle, all members of Parliament are equal, and also means that Parliament is supreme. The Prime Minister reports to Parliament, not the other way around. This is being turned on its head in a way that's dangerous. So I look at this and I know that there are Conservatives who are thinking, what the heck? We were grassroots populists when we loved Preston Manning. We're prepared to think that Stephen Harper was cut from the same cloth. But, holy mackerel, talk about top-down dictatorship, talk about corruption, talk about the numbers of scandals and money being misused. Someone like Brett Rathgaber is worth your finding and reading his blogs. He was a Conservative member of Parliament. He now sits as an independent. He's one of the most trenchant critics of the corruption from within of the Conservative Party. He's the member of Parliament for Edmonton, St. Albert. And I think Brett Rathgaber is he's a friend of mine, he's brilliant, and he stood on principle and walked away from the Conservative caucus because he found what Harper was doing, corrupting our basic principles of responsible government. Joe Clark spoke in my riding recently, the Right Honorable Joe Clark, a former Prime Minister, progressive Conservative. He said to a group, it was an event organized by the Green Party in my riding. 900 people showed up to hear Joe Clark. And he said that Stephen Harper was violating Magna Carta. You have to go pretty far to find a better way of summing up what I've been trying to say, that our basic democracy is being corrupted by this notion that everything can be run by a prime minister with dictatorial powers and control over everything. The former chief of staff in Brian Mulroney's office, Lowell Murray, who was a progressive conservative who was a senator, when he resigned the Senate, he said the members of cabinet, Stephen Harper's cabinet, are quote unquote mere ciphers delivering the talking points for PMO. So the good news is Harper will be gone. The other news is we've got a job to do to make sure that Mulcair or Justin Trudeau don't think that their job is to be the new dictator. We've got to dismantle PMO brick by brick. We've got to cut off their money. They get $10 million a year of public funds to do nothing but partisan work to keep their party in power in power. So it's an absolute nonsense to talk about who's going to be elected prime minister. You hear people saying that correctly. Say, no, we elect our member of parliament. So the good news is, this is like on the levels of high degrees of probability, that at the end of the 2015 election, there will be a minority parliament. No party will have a majority, a real one or a fake one, like the one Harper has. And in that minority parliament, there will be enough Green members of Parliament to potentially be the balance of power to ensure that whichever parties we choose to work with, which will be the ones who are prepared to get rid of first past the post and have a real climate plan, that those parties that are prepared to work with us can govern reliably with a stable time period till the next election, as long as we make the progress we need to make on the issues that matter the most to Canadians. That's what happened back in the late 1960s when Lester B. Pearson was Prime Minister. It was a minority parliament, and the NDP at the time, led by David Lewis, Stephen Lewis's father, worked cooperatively. There was no formal coalition. I'm not against coalitions, by the way, but back then in the late 60s, there was no formal coalition. I don't know how many of you remember what happened when Lester B. Pearson was Prime Minister. We got the entire social safety net, universal health care, old age pensions, unemployment insurance, all happened in a minority parliament where one party had enough principle to put the good of the country ahead of their party getting the credit. And that's what we have to do. So I'm going to be happy to answer some questions. I'm not sure how long you guys can stand it. Those of you who are standing, I'm feeling very worried for you. But I do want to share one more thing. To make this work, and this will work, we're going to elect quite a few, or a lot, of Green MPs in the next election. By the way, I want at least 12, because that gives us official party status, the right to sit on committees, and to be in question period every day as a caucus of Green MPs. We have a rule against whipped votes. Green MPs will be so different from the others. They won't be reading the script they've been given by their leader's office. It'll be refreshing. They'll stand up and speak from the heart. I may not always agree with what they say, because Greens believe that once you're elected, you don't check your brain at the door. Your job is to work for your constituents. So you shouldn't sound like a broken record. So to make this work, I need more from you than your commitment to turn out and vote Green. The thing that we need to save this country is to wake up the largest voting bloc. The largest voting bloc in Canada for the last couple of elections has been the people who didn't vote. And there's no website that's going to make this happen. There is no campaign from Elections Canada. Well, they're not allowed to campaign anymore. The only way we can make this happen is personal. It's a buddy system. I'm promoting the idea of voting buddies. What you want to do is between now and the next election, given that 40% of Canadians didn't vote, chances are, whether you know it or not now, you know some people who didn't vote. Find out, ask around. Did you vote in 2011? Who did you vote for? Find someone who maybe never has voted. I was shocked the other day. I was speaking in my riding, and I'm now 60, and a gentleman a little bit older than me came up to me and said, just want you to know, and he was very distinguished, very well dressed. I said, I just want you to know, he said, and I make cultural assumptions. I hate it, I admit it. This guy looked like he probably was a wealthy businessman. He said to me, I just want you to know, I voted for you in 2011. I'm really glad I did. I'm really glad you're my member of parliament. It's the first time I ever voted. And I said, well, I was thinking, okay, so did you move here from somewhere else? Do you mean this is the first time you voted in Canada? He said, no. I was born here. It's just the first time I ever realized there was anything worth voting for. So that's why I voted for you. So it's the first time I ever voted. So I was gobsmacked. Okay, so don't make assumptions about who you might know who votes and who doesn't. Find someone who didn't vote in the last election and ask if they'd be willing to be your buddy, that you want to take them to the polls. You're not going to ask how they plan to vote. It doesn't even matter. If they say, where do I find out what the parties stand for, direct them to websites, but get them to the polls on an advance poll day. Because remember, the Unfair Elections Act is going to make it much harder to vote than it used to be, particularly for someone who's never voted before, particularly for young people, particularly for First Nations people, particularly for homeless people, but a lot of people are going to find it harder to vote. So make sure you don't wait till voting day. Go to an advance poll. So if the paperwork isn't right, you've got a margin for error to get your buddy all organized and come back. Because I don't want to hear, I've heard so many sad stories of students who tried to vote in the last election, got to the polling station and were told that their paperwork wasn't right, that they didn't have enough to prove where they lived. So this could make a real difference. The hope and inspiration of the Green Party is in bringing people back to democracy, reawakening that sense that we're in control of our own future, that we're not living in a corporatocracy where the transnationals control everything and we're bystanders. We're still in a democracy. We're not in a dictatorship. We can reclaim our own power to control our future, but we have to vote. And what happens when people get excited about a Green candidate in their riding is that voter turnout goes up. In 2011 in my riding, and you probably will remember, I defeated Gary Lunn, who was a member of Stephen Harper's cabinet. It's not like I went after some weak MP that nobody, I couldn't stand to run against anybody except someone in Harper's cabinet. So I ran against Gary Lunn, and he'd been popular. He'd been in that riding for 14 years. By the way, the smart money, the so-called strategic vote crowd, looked at the results from the 2008 election and said, oh, people can't vote Green. The strategic vote here is to vote Liberal, because the Liberals almost won in 2008. Don't get sucked in by people who think they're smarter than voters, who look at data from 2011 and think it predicts what happens in 2015. There were people who said to me, you're just going to split the vote. It's terrible that you're running here, because people are going to like you, and then that's just that. You're going to ensure that Gary Lunn gets in again. I beat Gary Lunn by 7,000 votes. That's applause for the voters in my riding, who, by the way, voter turnout was other than Prince Edward Island, which has high voter turnout in tiny little ridings, it's a tiny little province, it's okay. Other than PEI, Saanich Gulf Islands, with 100,000 electors in the riding at the time, had 75% voter turnout, the highest in Canada, because people knew that their vote was going to make a difference. People got excited about the fact they were going to go and cast their ballot and feel as though this time it might make a real difference. This time I'm not told I have to hold my nose and vote for someone I don't want because I've got to do it because otherwise the guy I really don't want is going to get in. When you're freed from the shackles of the thinking that invades strategic voting and you vote for what you want, you can get almost giddy about it. So, Saanich Gulf Islands, I have the highest voter turnout in Canada, except for PEI. The next Green elected was Andrew Weaver, Nobel Prize-winning climate scientist, professor at University of Victoria. He won in Oak Bay Gordon Head. Overlaps with my riding by a bit. I've got some constituents who say to me every time they say, I'm so fortunate, I'm so lucky, I'm so happy, I have a Green MLA and a Green MP, and they're very happy about it. But Andrew Weaver won with the highest voter turnout in British Columbia in that election. And Andrew said on election night, because he'd been told the same stuff, you're going to split the vote, conservative. Andrew Weaver said on election night, Greens didn't split the vote in Oak Bay Gordon Head. Greens are the vote and go Bay Gordon ahead. You know, it changes your dynamic. And then in New Brunswick, other side of the country, I don't know how many of you paid attention to David Kuhn winning his seat. Leader of the New Brunswick Green Party defeated the sitting energy minister. Oh, I forgot to mention, Andrew Weaver defeated a sitting member of Christy Clark's cabinet. It's called the Liberal Party, but in BC it's the Conservative Party. So where Greens succeed, it's where citizens re-engage, decide to believe in their own power to change the existing system that's bedded in cynicism and fear and contempt for the electorate, because it assumes that people who suppress the vote, who run trickster campaigns like robocalls, who are willing to lie to you and run attack ads and create and instill a fear-based movement, when we say to them, get the hell out of here, we want our democracy back, it works. And people come back to the idea that voting has power. So I'm excited about the next election. I'm really thrilled you're all here. I talked longer than I meant to. I hope you can forgive me. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much. Thanks. Okay, how many questions?
You just want to take questions for a while? It's empty as a debate, so no matter what happens.
Okay, well, whatever. So, thank you. Those of you who were standing had no choice. You were in a standing ovation. But those of you who stepped up, it was very touching. Thank you very much. So I'll try to answer questions. I'll try to spot you. Maybe Peter can help me spot hands. Or do you have a question first, Peter?
I have a question. What about the debates? Are you going to be in the debates?
Okay. As far as yes, I'll just say yes. Yes, I'll be in the televised leaders' debates. There's some parties trying. We have a bit of pushback from some of the other parties, but all the indications from the very quiet conversations that the Green Party has been having with the networks is that they understand, look, we've got 2 MPs. I was elected as a Green Party of Canada MP. I sit as a Green MP. And when you look at precedents, Preston Manning was included in the debates before he'd won a seat, but when Deb Gray had won a seat in a by-election for Reform, Jean Charest and Elsie Wayne, the progressive Conservatives, were in the debates when they had 2 MPs. So we've met all the tests, and we're running across the country. We're in every riding across the country. So it's clear that some of the other political parties, well, let me be clear, all of the other political parties don't want me in the debates. But I'm hoping that their objections will vanish soon, and that the consortium will make it clear so that there won't be any doubt at all. But I'm very confident that I will be. It'll be good. Yeah. So.
What will you do about climate change when you become Prime Minister?
Well, okay. Well, let's assume for now that we're in the real world and we're going to become a significant influence on the other parties so we can get the climate change agenda dealt with. The first thing is that almost immediately after the fall election is the negotiation at COP21, which is the deadline for a new treaty. Now, for the last number of years, I've been the only opposition member of Parliament to attend the climate negotiations under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. I don't know why, but no Liberals and no New Democrats have come to these negotiations for a long time. So I have a great sense of dismay having attended the negotiations for so long. First of all, of course, we all know, well, maybe we don't all know, Stephen Harper's actions as our Prime Minister have damaged the negotiations globally, have slowed them down, have sabotaged, have created the space for other countries to act badly, where if we were still in a kind of a leadership good guy role, they wouldn't have dared do the things they've done. So right now we have competition for worst party in the room, because Australia is so awful now with Roberts, just appalling with Abbott there. So there's Canada, Harper and Abbott being the climate bad boys of the world. And there used to be leadership from the European Union, but they've been dragged down by countries within the former Soviet bloc that rely on coal a lot, like Poland and the Czech Republic. So you end up having the EU in sort of a mushy middle. The US is nowhere. They give great speeches, but when you get into the negotiation, they're not pushing. So we are actually, since Copenhagen in 2009, the world has been trying to gradually move back to a place where we could negotiate an all-inclusive treaty that does what we need to do to avoid going over 2 degrees Celsius global average temperature increase. To get there from here, we need some country in the room that takes leadership and actually puts every bit of muscle, every shoulder to the wheel to get other countries to agree to do more than they plan to do when they show up there for the negotiations. That's got to be us. We know how to do that. With enough Green MPs, we can work with the other parties and say, look, just let us help you get your ducks in a row for these negotiations, because we know all the issues, we've been paying attention, we know what Canada should accomplish, and basically, I don't care, you can get all the credit, it'd be great. Whether it's a Prime Minister Mulcair or a Prime Minister Trudeau, you can take all the credit, but let Greens show up and let us bring back the people who know how to negotiate. Now, what we have to do is simple. We have to move off fossil fuels as rapidly as possible, everywhere. The good news is, and this is even in today's Globe and Mail, I wrote about it this week in the Hill Times, the Ottawa sort of insider paper. The really amazing news is the price of new solar installations is competitive with coal. This is what's happening around the world. Last year, for the first time ever, investors put more money in renewables than into fossil fuels. This is not dictated by trying to feel good or because they saw a Greenpeace ad. These are people who are dedicated to making money. And they invested more money in renewables than in fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are going to be very quickly over. So that's another reason that Stephen Harper's much lauded economic prowess. Are you kidding me? Putting all our eggs in the bitumen basket? What was that about? It was the dumbest scheme ever, and now we're figuring that out. Now, fortunately, it was never true that our economy depended on oil. The oil sands are, I guess you probably all know this, you're smart. How much of GDP? 2% of GDP, right? So we've all been told that we had to accept pipelines and tankers and getting rid of our Fisheries Act and getting rid of the Environmental Assessment Act and getting rid of all our navigable waters because Canada's future lies in the 2% of our GDP from killing our children. I don't think that's it. I really don't think that. So the good news is also last year I read, it was actually a tweet from Naomi Klein today, first place I read, that in 2014, it's the first year in a very long time, since 2008, it's the first year where greenhouse gases didn't rise. But that means it's the first year when greenhouse gases didn't rise without an economic disaster that drove down greenhouse gases. So this is an indication with more, so we have to move off fossil fuels very sharply. We have to do it, we should be at least 80% below where we were in 1990 by mid-century 2050. That means we've got to shut down coal-fired power plants. Ontario's in the lead on this, but Alberta still gets its electricity from coal. The electricity from the greenhouse gases from Alberta's coal-fired electricity generation is still equal to or slightly bigger than all the greenhouse gases from the oil sands. So we get Alberta to shut down its coal plants, we get Saskatchewan to shut down its coal plants, we stop driving internal combustion engine vehicles. It's going to happen very quickly, particularly if we can get cheap and reliable electricity from solar. We're going to start driving electric vehicles. It's going to be a transition that begins to happen as fast as people left their horse and buggies and jumped into their Model T Fords. It will be driven faster with carbon pricing. It'll be driven faster with fee and dividend. It'll be driven faster when we get rid of subsidies to fossil fuels. It'll be driven faster if the world community agrees in Paris that it's time to reform the trade deals so they don't get in the way of getting off fossil fuels. These are things we can do as Greens around the world. The negotiator for climate for Sweden is Åsa Romson, who's the Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden in a coalition, and she's also the Minister for Climate. There are Greens in coalitions around the world, and if we can get to Paris as Greens, either in cooperation or in coalition, we can put Canada back in the place we used to be, of responsible country, admired by others for leadership. And I think that's a really good reason to find that buddy and bring them to the polls. So that's going to make a difference. Well, one or two more, it's up to you. That young woman, we don't have any women.
I have 2 requests for Green with
Uh-huh.
Guide us into how we use our purchases and our investments. I don't just mean like small things, but how to invest our money wisely in ways that support the principles of this movement. Because David Suzuki gives a little bit of support, but it's really hard to find trustworthy sources.
Okay.
So there are two parts.
All of the commercial banks, if you have an RRSP, all those commercial banks are invested in oil sands. So if you can get your RRSPs out of the commercial banks, if you happen to have RRSPs, and I don't have much of one, but I did find the Investors Group has something called Summa Fund with no oil sands money. If you're part of an institution, particularly a university, the divestment campaigns that are being run by students across North America are wonderful. We should be divesting of fossil fuels in the same way that we drove the South African apartheid system into the ground. One of the ways it was done was by divesting, by not trading, by actually making South Africa feel an economic pinch. But the motivation in going to shareholder meetings and saying divest from South Africa was a moral justification. So I think we also need to reclaim that kind of language. What got rid of slavery? Arguing that it really wasn't a good economic system and there were alternatives? I don't think so. I think the abolitionist movement was driven by people who realized it was unconscionable to think you could own another human being, unconscionable to base your economy, as it then was. The energy of the 1860s was slavery. For much of the British Empire and the United States. So the arguments that got rid of that energy cost were moral arguments. I think we actually have to be confident we can reclaim some of those arguments about, do we have the right in our generation to deny our kids a future? Especially when, and this is where the marketplace arguments get really exciting, we've got alternatives. Hey, hello, look at the price of solar. Look what's happening to wind. Look at geothermal. Look at tidal. Look at stopping wasting so much energy. These are good arguments, and they actually describe a healthy, prosperous society once we stop being afraid. Again, these days, I've decided that fear is probably is a bigger problem than ignorance. Fear is a real problem, and we have to embrace our own ability to set out a goal and inspire other people to accept that we know where we're going and they will have fun if they come with us. It's going to be. So you had another question. I stopped you after one.
Yeah, it's a request, really.
I don't really sing, is the thing.
It's related to the idea of not having a right to halt life for those who come after. I'd love to see a greater presence and acknowledgement of Indigenous peoples in the green position. It's actually been quite hidden.
No.
But in a way, if anybody was new to, I'd love to see it just a little more.
Well, I guess you're not in British Columbia. You're not in British Columbia, obviously. The First Nations who participated in drafting our platform know it's the strongest around First Nations issues. I lambasted, well, it's fun, not really fun, but in Parliament today I made the point again and again and again. Perry Bellegarde, National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, in opposing C-51, today in the House, Roxanne James, who's Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Public Safety, and she's a little challenging to deal with, but she actually said in the House, well, the chief came, and it was good he came because I was able to explain to him that the bill is fine. I stood up and said, I would ask the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs if he will educate his caucus as to the meaning of Section 35 of the Constitution of this country and the inherent embedded constitutional rights of First Nations that cannot be explained away by a parliamentary secretary. Some of our strongest candidates are First Nations. So I take it as an important criticism if you don't think that's embedded, but it's really strong.
It's not a criticism, it's clear if you understand it already.
Okay.
It's embedded, but in terms of bringing in new electorate, I think it would be a wonderful opportunity to enlarge and include more people.
Absolutely. Now, I'm really hoping Fran Hunt-Janucci, who's running in Cowichan, Malahat, Langford, she's a former chief of Cotsino First Nation. I'm really hoping she's on Vancouver Island, and she's in one of those seats that will be tight, but I think she can pull it off. She'd be incredible in Parliament. She's a really inspiring woman, and Anyway, there's a lot. I shouldn't ramble on about it. That's a good point. And do you think we have time for one more question?
Sure.
You pick. It's almost impossible.
Sorry, Johannes.
Hi, my name is Johannes Chapman. I also go by Yo, and I make Singing Canary hemp seeds. It's a little snack. My green flavor is a little bit sweet, so I'll give you a pack of little bit sweets afterwards. And as a strong hemp advocate, I'm just curious about how green the Green Party is. Especially in light of Justin Trudeau's somewhat...
Well, we were first. You know, we were first. It's been green policy for at least as long as I've been involved with the Green Party that prohibition doesn't work, that cannabis isn't more dangerous than recreational coffee, alcohol, you know, this is tobacco, actually probably less dangerous than tobacco. So the green policy is to legalize, regulate, and tax cannabis, and to have whatever anyone wants to grow in their backyard doesn't need to be regulated any more than we regulate people having a garden for tomatoes. And just be sensible. We do need to recognize that in there is some health evidence that I look at that concerns me for adolescents who get involved with too high THC and too much too young, that can actually be a health issue. So we have to be candid about it. But no, prohibition doesn't work, and all it does is fuel organized crime. And the RCMP in this country, I've talked to so many policemen who agree, it distorts law enforcement. And of course, one of the things Stephen Harper's done with these mandatory minimums and punishments is if you have more than 6 marijuana plants, you can become targeted for imprisonment. So we're going in the opposite, the Harper administration's been going in the opposite direction from the Canadian public. I do have a confession for you though, Yo, I'm sorry. I have to admit, not only have I never been arrested, I've never smoked dope. I'm really not suitable to be the leader of the Green Party. However, I'm sure that when we elect more Green MPs, there will be some who have experienced both being arrested and smoking cannabis, or maybe even eating it in brownies. I've never done that either, so really not good. It's okay, you forgive me? Okay, good. I have used hemp paper. Yeah, I didn't inhale. So, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. On behalf of the local Greens, we wanted to give you a shirt. It actually spells out Hamilton, and most of the symbols are Indigenous symbols.
Oh, cool.
So there's a shirt.
Thank you.
And we also have a shirt here that shows the shift from greed to green. That's one of the elements.
Wow.
So I want to thank everyone for everyone that helped organize this event. It's been quite successful. So can we just give them a hand? And how many people are from other ridings here? Quite a few, right? And
Oh, I forgot to tell you some fun stuff. I forgot to tell you some fun stuff. Did you guys notice who just became the senior policy advisor to me as leader of the Green Party? Deborah Coyne. Yeah, Deborah Coyne. And we've got such amazing candidates announcing across the country. I can't tell you about them now, but Danielle Green in Quebec, as deputy leader there, is organizing a real kick-ass campaign where we're going to focus on stopping Energy East. So that's going to be fun for Quebec. We've got more announcements to come of great candidates who are announcing across the country. So I just wanted to share that. Great candidate. How many of you in this room are running? Hands up.
I want to.
Okay. All right.
I'm Phil Ryerson. I put in my name for the Green Party here for Hamilton Central.
So we're going to have some contested riding, some fun. I just thought I'd mention Deborah Coyne because the media did a bit of an about face because she's a constitutional law expert and you probably know a lot about her. But she had been running for Liberal leadership and she's very impressive. I love having her working with me. She's just so brainy. Anyway, sorry, I'm hogging the mic again.
that's perfect. Thank you. So just to wrap up, how many people are members here? Maybe 20%. So if you would consider being a member, they're $10. You get 75% back. We have shirts we're giving away. They're the Greed to Green shirts. If you would like to give a donation, we're accepting them at the back. And beforehand, we had a Growing Green in Hamilton event. And I think we had 30 organizations responded. Who were from some of those organizations? So you were here, but you never got to do it, right? No, I'm talking to, you never got to do it today? The elevator pitch. Okay, yeah. So we had 30 organizations do an elevator pitch or sign up for it, and that's just a symptom of the grassroots movement that's around us. And a lot of that does have more to do than just a political party, right? It's a grassroots movement that doesn't really have a name. So we're really that sustainable voice at the political level. So we have a counselor here, we have MAC students that helped organize, we have professionals in the media industry. We have such a wide range of people here, and I just want to say thanks very much, and especially to Selena for allowing us to be in the hall. Thanks very much, Selena. Okay. I just want to point out one more person, Michael Neighbert. Thank you very much. Michael Neighbert. Michael, can you stand? Michael? Yeah, Michael's doing our social media, and his posts are getting like 100 to 500,000 hits, and they're so meaningful, and everyone's sharing them across the country. So Michael's a real resource. That we're lucky we have such diversity. Let's work together to make the community better. Thank you. Great.